All right, here we are. Welcome,
Hello.
everyone, and welcome, Michael Hamman.
Hello, everybody. I wish I could see
Michael,
you. I'm imagining you all there.
yeah, that's the point. That's
Mhm.
the limitation compared to, for example, an open space or conference or anything alike. But that's the point already to everyone who is joining tonight, today, this morning, wherever you're from. First of all, welcome. Um, Feel free or even welcome to provide us your questions, comments, because we want to make it interactive and we'll pull in all of your questions at the point in time. So here's Olive already saying hello because that makes it a little bit interactive. I know Olive, I think, from social media, but you know each other personally. And then there are many other people now tuning in. So that's great. That makes it really lively. And yeah, feel free to bring in all your questions. We'll pull them in. We'll have an eye for them and pull them in the right direction. And yeah, it's my pleasure today talking to Michael Hamman, whom I met. I don't know when was that, 5 6 years ago, 5 years maybe, in Vienna, Austria,
Mhm.
in one of these probably late stage agile coaching courses. So probably, I don't know, 10 years or later, after you had created it.
Mhm.
But I was very impressed about this in person meeting. And a lot of people watching now probably know Michael. But still, I would like you to give us a little bit of an introduction. I thought about maybe give us, let us know a little bit about yourself, about the Michael Hamman you were 20 years ago. And then in comparison to that, the version of yourself in 22.
Okay. And all of that will be told from the perspective of the version that is sitting here now. So just keep in
Right.
mind, we have perspectives of perspectives. So here's the perspective, current perspective of 20 years ago. Uh, I was at the tail end of being a composer, and I had just wrapped all of that up and was giving myself over fully to professional coaching. I was being trained as a professional coach. I was coaching software teams and more with Agile. I had been a software developer. Hello, everybody. I see all these hellos. Nice to see you. And but I really came at it from a humanist perspective. So I had a strong software development background. I was a composer and a writer and a scholar, and so I had that background. I also had a background. I worked a lot in transformational education programs and was trained to lead certain transformational education programs and brought all of that training into the work I did with coaching teams. So 20 years ago, I was about helping a lot of startups get going and bringing a variety of tools to bear in creating really, really effective software teams. And that's pretty much what I was doing 20 years ago, starting to move into the agile sphere. Uh, and it was cool. It was great. And today, so 2022, um, now I guess what I could say is I'm going to borrow a term from my dear friend and colleague and partner, Michael Spade, that what I'm up to now is that I am up to transforming transformers. So, having been a quote transformer, and a transformer is just somebody who works with people on the field, in the field of their work, to aid and to catalyze their transformation so that the work they do in the world is effective. And I work with those people. So that's become my sweet spot now.
Right. Wonderful. And here's a secret. You're from the US, right, Michael? Or
Yep.
yeah, but
Yep.
you're currently calling from
Stockholm, Sweden.
Stockholm,
Yes.
Sweden, because that's your current home
That's my
home
that's
base, right?
that's my new home. It's an experiment, and there's a whole story,
Right.
background story behind this. But and here I am in Stockholm, Sweden,
Right.
and
Right.
and so so much of it this last year has been about how do you create from what is, even if it's not
Yeah.
necessarily a preference. And that's a
Yeah.
theme that kind of goes through a lot of the work that I do with people, which is how do we create from what is?
Right. That's a nice intro trigger. We
Mm.
we talk a lot. We'll talk about leadership a lot today, about personal development. And Ray is already pulling in a little challenging phrase here. Transformation is dead. Long live transformation of transformers. So transformation is a question what we mean by that, right? And
Yeah,
that's
sure.
probably
Yeah.
another interesting topic for today. But before we get into the real leadership topic and self-development topic, a little bit of memory, a little bit about memories, because I think what you already mentioned, Michael Spade, and you also worked with Lisa Atkins. You were, I think, the three amigos, I could say,
Mm.
at the
Mm.
Agile Coaching Institute, and that said, I think you coined the term agile coaching somehow. So you were probably the ones who were bringing this more and more into the communities, into the let's say ecosystem.
Mm.
And today, agile coaching is a big thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, connecting the dots, this should also and could also be a lot about leadership. But,
Yeah.
bridging this whole 20 years of development, probably, um, what's your most memorable and most important thing you take with you from this whole phase of development, developing the agile coach discipline? What has changed? How did that you know f- become a thing for you?
Well, I'm not sure who coined the term agile coach. I started using the term myself back in 2004 when I first started coaching in large corporate environments. Sanjeev Augustine called me in. I had already left. I had done agile coaching for a while by that time and had left it and had my own sort of private coaching practice. And Sanjeev called me and made an offer I couldn't refuse, and so I went to Capital One, and it was a revelation because at that time we were using the term Scrum Master. So Scrum was kind of the big thing then. It was a new thing actually. It
Right.
might be hard for people to imagine that Scrum was a new thing, but at one time it was a new thing, and I'm not going to claim I'm the only person. I mean, I think it was in the zeitgeist, the notion of
Mm.
a more systemically informed approach to guiding or leading or coaching software teams, a systemic approach that started to become aware of the impact on management and leadership, on other parts of the organization, that started to see maybe even the organization development angle and the professional coaching angle. So the whole broad sphere of disciplines that came to be awakened within the discipline of working with teams and increasingly working with organizations, because I think many of us saw at the very beginning that what was really hard for teams was what was really hard for organizations. And so the whole thing of bringing OD and professional coaching and leadership and executive coaching and working with executives, I mean, all of that was in the zeitgeist. It was it was an idea waiting to happen, and it did. And it was an
Yeah.
exciting time, those early 2000s. At that time, it felt like lots of things were possible because nobody was doing anything and nobody
Yeah.
knew, quote, the right way to do things.
Yeah. Yeah. That is nice. And I myself, I sometimes get reminded on these days where I say we used to be more outliers than mainstreamers.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
this turned around a little bit, and this
yeah,
is what I'm sometimes missing, right? Because
yeah,
the outliers were ambitious, there was energy, there was a sort of meaning behind, and
yeah.
mainstream turned it into a stressful undertaking. And before I move on, Sabina was just mentioning there
Yeah.
was some noise potentially coming from microphone phone. Are you sitting on the balcony, Michael, or
No, but
have,
I have a window open. I don't know if
all right, that
wind
might
might
be
be
it, just in
coming
case.
in somehow. Let me.
The nice, wonderful. I mean, yeah, it's by the way, we didn't mention it yet. It's the beginning of summer today, right? And it
Yeah,
must be
it's
the
just,
longest day ever in Sweden,
yeah, it's a really long day. It doesn't. It actually doesn't get dark here.
right?
It's
That's a
not
nice
sun's up
metaphor.
all the time, but it doesn't. It doesn't get completely dark, so it's beautiful. So
That's already a nice metaphor for our conversation because
yeah, yeah,
moving further, and coming to the actual topic of today, there is, the Agile Manifesto. We don't need to talk about this, but it starts with people and interactions, right? And you mentioned systemic perspectives. With this whole coaching came this notion of looking at multiple angles and the, interdependencies and all these things. And then comes obviously complexity. What do you think? Do we miss something here with today's, let's say, mainstream? If we get back to the mainstream, there's so much investment into agile. Everybody needs to have an agile organization, agile leadership, and agile product development, you name it. But the results are sometimes not so great. And very often, it's my observation, it turns out into a very stressful and less ambitious undertaking. And so for me, it's this question, are we missing out something here? Is there something maybe that we are taking it from the wrong perspective, or what do you think?
Well, I have a particular bias in these things, and I tend to see things as part of a larger, a greater unfolding. And so from that perspective, I would say that how people are doing things in the mainstream is not necessarily wrong. It's just part of the overall unfolding. If you look at, if we look at things as in the context of 100-year social unfolding or cultural unfolding, like 100-year, kind of waves, if you will, or arcs, we're kind of in the midst of a certain kind of arc. And we have to move through certain things that, seen from maybe a later perspective, might be perceived or understood as maybe wrong, as misguided, as whatever we might want to say about it. And in my view, we have to have the entire range of activities in order for those parts of the unfolding that will truly take us forward to emerge. It's a dialectical process. So a dialectical process means that something that is potentially undesirable comes into contact with something that's preferred. And it's only when we allow those two, the undesired and the preferred, to coexist, that the possibility of some kind of transformational unfolding from that can happen. And so in my view, we want to celebrate all the mistakes. We want to celebrate all of the misturns we may be taking, knowing that this is a broader social transformation, not so much about quote unquote transforming this company or that enterprise. In my view, companies and enterprises are just boats, in a sense, that are floating on the sea, and our focus ought to be, where is the sea going?
Oh, wow. I totally love this thought of yours. What a coincidence. Yesterday, I thought about this, permanent discussion about companies' lifespans, which are typically going downwards. And at the same time, I thought, all right, what's the problem with that? I mean, first of all, I was questioning a little bit the data, because some companies have been there still since 100 years. I mean, if you think about Mercedes-Benz, they're still there, and they're, some people like Tesla, others like Mercedes-Benz, and who knows where they're getting to and where they're going. And at the same time, I just thought maybe it's just a natural development of our times. Something emerging, as you say, we are not yet aware of. For example, maybe micro enterprises becoming more important, or, connected throughout the world in a way which is like a corporate, but at the same time isn't.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, and you were talking, but before we started, you were talking about Satya Nadella, and I'd like to suggest the possibility that without Bill Gates, Satya Nadella could never have emerged at Microsoft. So there's just certain phases of developments. This is true of us as individual humans. You asked me about 20 years ago. I never said anything about where I see myself having been developmentally 20 years ago. And and I might cringe at some of the ways of being that seemed very okay to me at the time that wouldn't be okay to me now. But
Exactly.
and it was a necessary part of the unfolding.
Right, right.
We
And
are not
that gives a different perspective, right?
yeah.
And I mean, instead of being against something, instead of playing A out versus B, um, instead of permanently being competitive,
Mhm.
basically working on the emergent results and appreciate and build upon.
Mm.
And that brings me already next step to your book. I
Mm.
mean, the book Evolve Agility itself, the title is already great. Evolve Agility, what it means, we might dive into a little bit, but there is one concept you talk about there, which is inner agility. You basically compare outer agility and then talk more about what the inner agility would create. Maybe give us a little bit of an idea what inner agility today means for you, what you wrote already about a few years ago.
Yeah. Um, for me, inner agility means simply that when I have inner agility, I have the capacity to be with whatever it is that's happening with grace and elegance and a through line for effective action. I think is the simplest way I could say it is that inner agility it refers to my capacity to be with what's happening in the moment in all of its complexity, in all of its unpredictability, in all of its not falling in line with what I prefer, in all of its ambiguity, that the way situations show up for us is that with which we can dance. And that in that dancing, the actions we generate are effective in relation to those situations. So inner agility has something to do with our capacity for being in that dance with whatever it is that's going on in all of its complexity, ambiguity, um, surprise, unpredictability,
Mm,
all of that. So it's
mm,
actually fairly simple. I mean, if you think of it conceptually, it's fairly simple, um, but it's not so easy, is it?
yeah,
And if we're really honest with ourselves, if we're truly, truly honest with ourselves, it's not that
yeah.
easy.
And that's obviously a point here, as
Mm.
Abraham says, it's
Mm.
being with now as a core adaptability, agility.
Yeah.
Easy said, easy to understand, but obviously not so easy to get there. What do you think? I mean, you're the leadership coach. You're working with people on these concepts. What is the core essential to get there, even to recognize this concept, to recognize this capacity?
Yeah. So I would say one of the fundamental things, I would say one of the most fundamental things, I'm pausing to understand what it is I want to say, is our willingness to be authentic about the fact that we really can't be with what is.
Hmm.
It starts with the ability to be reflective, right? To be able to take a perspective of ourselves. So that's kind of like the table stakes of being able to get into a conversation for increasing inner agility. Because this is the thing that this is not a fixed property of the mind. It's not a fixed property of the personality. That all of this is plastic. All of it is completely growable. So neuroscience tells us,
Hmm.
I've been studying memory reconsolidation, which is
Hmm.
a whole approach of working with traumatic memories in which people are able to literally turn the switch off of the trauma reaction from memories. So that shows us that the mind is completely plastic. And so now, in order to be able to engage in redesigning, rewiring our capacity for inner agility, we have to start by recognizing that we're kind of full of it when it comes to, how smart we think we are, how capable we think we are, how emotionally mature we think we are. We want to come to grips with how we really are and how things really are in order to begin to grapple with the possibility into which we might move ourselves.
Right. So that is super interesting. It actually challenges probably what also Satya Nadella, you mentioned him, CEO of Microsoft, probably everybody knows, but what he compares with, they want to be more of a, learn all instead of a know it all organization,
Yeah, yeah,
especially first of all, because it's useful. But at the same time, because there is this understanding we can't know all.
yeah, yeah.
Now the question is just, and that maybe draws from your experience, especially as an established organization, what do you think can contribute to approach this sort of notion of, I don't know, listening more? I mean, recognizing there is something that might expand our current opinion, our current understanding of just getting stuff done, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to start by considering that for any big piece of work we endeavor to do as a society, as a globe, as a company, we always require some sort of technology. This is a kind of a perhaps a funny way to approach it. So, for instance, in order to develop software, there's a whole ecosystem of technologies and engineering practices and principles and structures and educational curricula, all of which come together to form an ecosystem which make possible our being effective in a certain domain of activity. In this case, the domain of activity being software development. So I used to be a software developer, so I'm not a person in the diner. I'm not somebody uninformed about software development. I know something about it. And what I can say is that software development is possible only because of a rich ecosystem, which includes a kind of a curriculum for developing ourselves as software developers, right? And what we need is something similar for inner human capability, sense-making capability, meaning-making capability, which is the capability, as I described a moment ago, to be able to stand in the face of the unknown, the unpredictable, and to dance with it in a way in which our actions are effective in the face of all of that. And that doesn't, I mean, for some people that happens by accident, but we tend to treat that whole inner quote realm as something almost accidental. We sort of try this, we try that. We take a kind of haphazard approach, which could never work in any other field of serious human endeavor. And yet we think it's going to work in this most serious of human endeavors, which is our own capacity for complex sense making. And we're rather haphazard about it. And the book Evolve Agility is really, in my view, it's an actually rather awkward first take or first stab at bringing together what such a discipline, what such a technology might be like. And incidentally, I'm not the only one who's done that. I credit, of course, Keegan and Leahy, their book Everyone Culture, and there have been others, Bill Torbert among them. So there are many people who are working on this. So I would say, just to come back around to your question, that we need to be quite deliberate about how we go about growing this sort of this capacity.
Right. That rings three bells in my mind. Oh, you're talking about vertical development, right? Somehow and more.
Yeah, sure.
And so this sort of, growing beyond ourselves, on and on and on, to see more, to, recognize more, to being able to connect things, to probably being better able to interact and everything alike. And everything probably will then come from there and not just from a static point of view where nobody moves. But I was just thinking, education, we've got, first of all, the chain rule education system, but let's look more at the already advanced one, which is business schools. And I recognize they are struggling a lot during the past years, I've listened to many conversations at Drucker Forum around, okay, what's important? What's the leader of tomorrow? What shall we focus on? Is it really all these tools, techniques about strategy and, you name it, all these techniques, which are important,
Yes.
but what do we build them upon? Number two, where is this function inside an organization which is nurturing that? And number three, leadership. I mean, now formal leadership even. How would we, move along here and nurture this and not just say, hey, let it emerge, right? As we said before, it will evolve anyway. But I think we're also here to give it a little bit more of energy in order to, go into certain directions and move faster or in more meaningful ways. What do you think our approach is? What are your approaches these days?
Yeah.
I know this is a tremendous complex question because it's actually three questions.
Well, but my job is actually a little bit easier now than it used to be, because my job is really working with people who do that kind of work, So, but what I would say in terms of like when I was a consultant, so a lot of what went into Evolve Agility came from my years when I was a consultant, and one of the most powerful, I can't remember the name of the book. It was such a great book. It was about this notion of, I know it's completely flying from my memory right now, but the basic idea is to create in any sort of social environment a good example, like to create, to create pockets where you're able to do the kind of work, you're able to leverage the kind of technology, the kind of deliberate technology. In the book, I refer to it as deliberately developmental, which is an eye toward deliberately growing people's sense making, meaning making capability, and to do that in pockets in combination with whatever it is people are already doing. So back in those days, I did it in combination with, Scrum or XP or SAFe as it was emerging. So it was always working with the predominant right-hand technology, to use the Ken Wilberian integral terminology. But doing it, not worrying about trying to get senior leadership on board, but finding pockets where it was possible, and bringing results, bringing effective capability into those pockets, so that then the possibility is that people start to notice that. Because what happens when people grow that kind of capability, they become noticeably more effective. As teams, as departments, as organizations, they become noticeably more effective. And then of course there's a whole strategy, there's a whole organizational, the strategic aspect of organizational change that then starts to come into here. I'm not going to go into that right now. So that would be one kind of approach to this. So yes, it's important that senior leadership get this and are able to lead it. But the interesting thing is that the most evolved senior leaders, executive leaders that I've worked with, have always said that I can't exercise my developmental leading edge here until other people are able to exercise their developmental leading edge. And so what they rely on is the building of a sense-making ecosystem that raises the level of sense-making across the organization or within pockets of the organization, knowing that much of the organization doesn't have to get there.
Right. There are a lot of interesting comments in the chat. I'm just bringing in some of them. Like this inside out has come up a couple of times. As Kenneth mentions here, how we show up and hold multiple perspectives. Even, I think, perspectives we're not directly attached to or wouldn't agree with, right?
Exactly, because it's non-linear. It's a non-linear dialectical process of unfolding, and there are things that are happening that we don't see right now, but are having a powerful effect. And the thing is that we have to keep playing with the system. Anyways, I'm going to stop. I could get too deeply
No, it's
into
good.
this.
And I mean, getting back to this practical approach, and you mentioned already a concrete, probably evolutionary approach to let's say start working inside an organization into this direction. What we still see with leadership is maybe it's an anti-pattern, or maybe it's one part of the evolutionary journey. Like leaders, especially senior leaders, very often, for example, consuming coaching, but individually. How do I get my capability forward to make better decisions, to you know better resist stress, and then all these things. And second, that's what I would add here, looking at senior leadership, even executive leadership, who, for example, want to get their organization moving in towards a more modern way of working, more teamwork. They not showing up as a team. Like, here's the CEO, here's the CFO, here's the CDO, CTO, and all these CXOs. And what I then very, very often recognize, doesn't look like a team. It looked more like political parties who play a highly complex political game, which, okay, fair enough, is there. But what do you think about that? Because what you mentioned before would point into a different direction, right?
Yeah. Well,
and it's a potential. It's not a must. It's just, we're talking just options here, right?
Yeah. What I've noticed is, as people in general, as they move into what adult developmental theory, stage theory, or tells us, is what they call post-conventional meaning making, or post-conventional sense making. That as people move into that post-conventional sphere, they're able to see that we work together as human systems. We start to see the power of human systems. And so, for instance, executive leaders who, even if they get, like, they might have a really good executive coach who's helping them move into these later stages of their own development. And it becomes patently obvious to them that my own development as an executive leader is, to a certain degree, tied to the development of my peers, of the people on my leadership team. And so I'm going to want to engage the whole team in an activity, in a process, and an unfolding of development as a team. So far we've been talking about development with a little bit of a bias toward individual development, but we're also talking about the development of human collectives. And they really arise together, that it's hard for me to imagine people moving into later stage meaning making capacity, toward greater inner agility, without understanding their development within the context of a larger collective development.
Right. So what do you think, Michael? Is that something that just happens, by coincidence, because the leader, some senior leader, maybe the boss or the senior executive manager, general manager, just went there and now recognizes, oh, we need to get there, like Satya Nadella, who didn't start the transformation with setting up new structures, tools, or anything, but basically brought his direct reports together and handed them out the nonviolent communications book, first of all. Second, started questioning who they were and what they were about to create instead of who they were today.
Yeah, that's right.
So, like, all these not so business oriented, or if you like, in your language, how do you say it? Predict and plan topics, but maybe more buying into the other world you describe in your book, the sense and response world, which probably in most organizations nobody's aware of. And now my question would be, how can we bring this into organizations? Is that something we need to establish, I don't know, in a department, or is that something where we need to change the curricula of management development? Or is that just something we need to leave to life?
It could be all of the above and more. The way, again, the way that I tend to see this is, I tend to see this as like ecosystemic design or environment design. By the way, what Satya Nadella was doing when he handed out copies of nonviolent communication, and when he started engaging people in new kinds of questions, he probably introduced new vocabularies. All of what he was doing was in the service of what in the book I call designing environments. When you design environments, you're not trying to get people to go anywhere. You're simply introducing new vocabularies, new ideas, new words, new distinctions, new practices, which, as some people will take them on and embrace them more than others, it doesn't matter, because again, my memory is failing me on yet another book. It was research that was done out of Stanford. They showed that in order to create a broader social transformation, it requires only roughly about 20% of the population that really get this new transformation, this new movement. And it's the same thing in organizations. And so in designing environments, what you're doing is you're planting seeds, lots of different kinds of seeds. And so that's why I say, yeah, all of that stuff is great. Yeah, management training programs, executive coaching, communication programs, ropes courses, working with horses, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is for different people, it lights the fire differently. For some people, the fire doesn't get lit. Some people, maybe it takes 2, 3, 5, 10 years for that fire to get lit. But sure enough, it eventually gets lit. And so what we're wanting to do is introduce a sufficient number of new vocabularies. And I don't mean just words, but I mean practices and other things. A sufficient number of new vocabularies that can spark like some sort of an insight, that somebody can see some new possibility, and in acting on that possibility, they influence the world around them. And the world around them are the people around them.
Right. So that reminds me, and I think we talked about it briefly also in a pre-conversation about SAP, the large German, for those who don't know, the large German software producer who got really boldly into this mindfulness practices. I think somebody picked up the Google Search Inside Yourself program and was quite interested in, and that started to create movement. So others got interested too, and they made it over the years. And there was even one guy who used to be a manager and engineer who said, I would have never touched it before. I never thought I would ever do that. And now I'm the evangelist, literally responsible for this inside the whole organization. I think 13,000 people already went through their internal program, and I think they have 9,000 in the queue. So it sounds like this story, right? Somebody just starts to use certain terminology and then apply it.
Well, and they also see, here's the key thing. Thank you for this. This is the key thing, that there was some way in which they were being that inspired one other person to see a new possibility for themselves. So a big part of this is a big part of, later stage, more complex meaning and sense making, is it doesn't just inform how we think. It literally informs all the cells of our body, that we become something else, that we manifest a different way of being, and that different way of being inspires people to see for themselves a new possibility, and to be able to, and to be willing to act on that possibility. So there's probably thousands of companies where somebody has tried to introduce mindfulness practice. By the way, again, it's ecosystemic, right? It's just, there was just the right moment in SAP, and it was the right person at the right moment. But chances are, at that moment, the most critical moment, it was the way this person was being that enrolled another person into a new possibility for themselves. Such they took action, and then they became a similar manifested a similar quality of being for somebody else and for other people, and so on. And that's how these things, that's among the ways in which these sorts of revolutions
Mm.
occur.
And at the same time, mentioning revolution, it's so much evolutionary, right? Where I would say, hey,
Yeah.
just because company A does it, it wouldn't make sense for us at the moment
That's right.
because
Exactly.
the context counts, right?
Yeah.
Somehow.
That's right.
But I want to get back to our initial, red line here, because Angela asked about evolve agility, and I think it's an interesting question.
Mhm.
How would you differentiate evolve agility from innovation, which is also critical to transformation? I can imagine there's tons of possible perspectives in this single question, but let's find out. And maybe Angeli, if you're still listening, you can add more to the question. But let's find out what could be a possible answer here.
Well, it's a great question, Angela. Thank you for that. I don't know that I would strongly differentiate them. It's, I actually relate evolve agility to innovation. In fact, I've talked about evolve agility in terms of innovation, but in this case, it's innovation in terms of innovating the way that we think, the way that we operate, the way that we see the world. So you could say that evolve agility introduces a set of distinctions, practices, and a kind of vocabulary to innovate how we are being, to bring innovation in the way that we think. So if you really examine innovation, like we usually talk about innovation as a kind of after the fact thing, after it produced some kind of breakthrough technology. But innovation always arises from a moment of extreme breakdown. So look, for instance, at the environment that Steve Jobs and others at Apple encountered before they produced what was the little thing, the iPod?
Yeah, iPod, yeah.
Yeah, the iPod. Remember the little
Okay,
iPod, right? But
right.
but the environment for like music, all that it was chaotic then. And so innovation, that's an example of an innovative idea that arises out of chaos. And in order to be innovative, we have to be able to be, as I was describing a moment ago, to be able to be steady and to be able to be in the face of unpredictability, of chaos, of confusion, of discomfort, of anxiety, all of that stuff, to stand in that, to allow ourselves to fully feel that, to get to the other side of that, in order to be able to see the possibility that is given by this moment that is we otherwise experience as we don't want it, or we don't prefer it, or it's too difficult or too confusing.
Yeah, that's a nice perspective. And Angela is just adding here what she's picking up from there, right? That it's more about a mindset and perhaps a collective mindset. And the term mindset is probably a very picky one, because it's often misused or misinterpreted. I would rather say misinterpreted.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, it's a psychological concept, just to say this is sort of our construction of how we make sense of the world, right? And nothing more. And there are different kinds of mindsets where we come from. So is that what your response would have been like? Is that sort of a mindset that finally drives innovation, drives the possibilities to
Yeah.
create out of chaos and use the opportunities?
Yeah. I could go along with that. I would want to kind of take a moment, which I'm not going to right now, to to kind of just distinguish what we mean by mindset. Uh,
Hmm.
but yes, you could say maybe more precisely that evolve agility is about the kinds of distinctions. It's a collection of distinctions and practices, the embracing of which helps to bring about a different kind of mindset, a greater degree of inner agility, if you will. And yes, it's individual and it's collective. And again, for me, individual and collective are almost like they're so intertwined that
Hmm.
our minds there's a great book by Dan Siegel called The Developing Mind, and he actually was a great friend of mine way back when he was a student at Harvard, and but he poses the idea that the human mind is inexplicably, is that right? Inextricably. I'm asking you,
You're
English.
the native speaker.
Inextricably, that the
Yeah,
human mind is inextricably intertwined with other human
yeah,
minds, that
yeah,
human mind arises in relationship, that
yeah,
we're inseparable, we're literally inseparable.
yeah.
And so when we say sense making complexity, we're talking individually as well as collectively.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I was
Thank
just thinking about twins, the typical story about twins who
you. Yeah,
somehow live similar lives, but
yeah,
the mirror neurons, all these things. But
yeah.
here's a nice thing. Oh, here's a
Mm.
comment from an anonymous user. I'm not sure if that's the words, but
Inextricably.
probably. Thanks a
It's
lot.
I have a slight speech impediment, so it's words like that are hard for me to say.
I
Inextricably.
can imagine this is probably addressing 99% of every population.
Yeah,
But
thank
Angela still has a different question, and that sounds
you.
even more complicated. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you ever compared these two, um, evolvability and anti-fragility from Nassim Taleb. This sort of there is
Yeah.
something beyond resilience even, which makes us stronger. I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
ever drew this
I mean,
comparison.
I really love the work of Taleb and anti-fragility. It's a very what I love. Well, for one thing, what I love about it is it's an audacious articulation of a possibility. I mean, I think of these things as possibilities, and a
Hmm.
possibility is it's a way of talking about something that opens up a new way of seeing things. And so to see, like, I mean, my life in the last year and a half there's been a lot of big breakdowns, right?
Hmm.
And to usually how we relate to breakdowns, there's a couple of different ways. One way that we relate to
Hmm.
breakdowns is we try to reestablish the previous status quo. We try to go
Hmm.
back to normal, right? And that's one way to deal with huge breakdowns. We try to reestablish an already established stability. Another way to deal with breakdowns is to kind of like take the breakdown and do the best that we can with it, try to make the best of it, right? So it's a maybe more positive response to breakdown. Another way to respond to breakdowns is to actually allow the brokenness to become the new normal, to
Hmm.
actually allow the brokenness to inform a whole new possibility, which is to say a whole new range of possible actions, whole new range of ways of relating, whole new way of identifying ourselves. And so I would say that again, that word differentiate. Um, uh, so no, I would not differentiate evolved agility from anti-fragility. I would
Hmm.
say that they are in friendly company with one another,
Hmm.
even though I believe that they may be um, the essential. The essential project of each of them is slightly different. They share a very common sentiment, which is the idea that we need breakdowns in order to be able to grow beyond the current status quo.
Hmm. Hmm. That reminds me a little bit. It's very, very amazing thoughts you bring here on emotional agility from Susan David. This
Yeah,
concept of facing our true emotions and not qualifying them in bad or good or anything, but
mm-hmm.
just being aware of emotions are what they are.
Yeah,
First of all, a chemical consequence, but then how to deal with them in order also not to neglect anything. And she's coming from this perspective where I think she lost her dad in a very early stage in her life, where
yeah,
people would have said, think more about the positive things, what he brought to you and anything. But she was
yeah,
in a state of grief and all these things. And I believe coming back to business, I think these things count a lot, especially now that we are in the crisis. I don't like the term, but
mm,
um, it's still something where the spot is on, obviously. And that brings me to the next question from Abram. I'm not sure if we 100% understand it, but it's like, would one need to know, experience certain fields in order to be more on the spot when it comes to action taking? And I'm not sure about the exact meaning of the question. Maybe Abram wants to add something. But it sounds like, can I learn this, or do I have to experience it? Is it something life teaches me, or is it in the books and I just need to, learn the practice? That's what I would do.
I think this really brings us to the notion of deliberately developmental environments that I've been fortunate enough in my life to have put myself in many, many programs. They often are called transformation programs, but they have different kinds of words associated with them. But I would say that all of these programs have been experiential. That's not to say that it's not to say that it was just about, like feelings. Oftentimes people associate experiential with, purely with feeling states and this kind of thing. But by experiential, I mean that that they're existentially, that they bring us to the nature of things existentially, that they bring us close to the truth of what it is to be a human being. And that is it. The first encounter is very difficult because we actually have to be in the face of the discomfort of looking at the truth of how we are and how other people are and how our life has been, and and really living with the regrets. And so I would say that a deliberately developmental environment is an environment in a sense that accelerates the rate at which we are able to experience those breakdowns in order to get to a new way of relating to how things are. So yes, you could get that sometimes from reading books, but I believe that oftentimes reading books is works when it's a counterpart to actually having had some sort of an experience.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Abram is just adding more, like, it's just Michael's experience here. I mean, you talk a lot, again, you mentioned all these vertical development, stage development theories, but they also play out quite a lot in practice, right? Where I think we often hear you have to go through certain stages of life in order to recognize what it feels, what it means to be like, right? It's not something you can learn at university or through reading or through a course. At least not sure if they get that right. There's another question from Hui. Again, I'm not 100% sure what it means. What's your perspective on the importance for coaches to working with their, and I'm not sure, own shadow? With their own shadow.
With their own. I'll take it as their own.
Oh, their own shadow. Yeah, it's just one word. Yeah, I've got meaning making. We're in the field.
That's right. That's right. Well, and here's the thing that, because I've had some interactions with Hui, so I can imagine that I understand. So I'm operating completely on assumptions. But so here's what I would say, that as human beings, we're always confronting our shadows, and at how we work with our shadows. And by shadows, by the way, just to say how I understand the term, those aspects of ourselves that we've rejected, that we've, that we've avoided, that we, don't accept as being part of ourselves. There are many good aspects, things that we would say that are really good aspects of ourselves that we reject. So there are light shadows and there are dark shadows, right? And I would say that working with our shadows is a critical part of this, especially if you have some sort of leadership role, because when you're in a leadership role, you're always dealing with other people's shadows because they project them onto you. You become their shadows and they become your shadows. And much of what we are doing when we interact with people, especially in high anxiety environments like the corporate setting, which is a very high anxiety environment. We have to admit that. is we're dealing mostly with one another's and our own shadows being projected onto other people and having theirs projected onto us. And so it's a little bit like you've ever seen those Balinese or Javanese shadow puppet shows where you don't actually ever see the figures themselves, you just see their shadows in a performance. And this is a lot like that. And so to the degree that we can recognize our own shadows and claim them, then there's a greater possibility for clean relationship, which is key in a business environment. I can't stress this enough. In all the years that I've worked with leaders and companies and organizations, the biggest issue I see is that people suck at relationship. We suck at relationship. We really do. And a big part of that has to do with us confronting and reclaiming our own shadows. There are many other things. There's skillful conversation, which we're not terribly skillful. But if we got just a little bit better at relationships uniformly and universally within an organization, the organization would improve. You wouldn't need these big culture improvement programs and all that other kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. So again, it's this sort of, where do you start? And I would even say, talking about coaches, what would you demand from your coaches? That's what I'm thinking a lot about recently, to say, as we usually say, clarifying clarifying the collaboration up front.
Yes, that's right.
In a way that before we jump into it, just say, hey, it's a wonderful gig or anything, to say, what do we expect from each other? Basically designing the relationship too.
Exactly.
And then maybe, and that's the question, really recognizing where there is fruitful soil to get somewhere. Whereas you might say, as a coach or consultant, however you show up, guys, I would rather suggest you move on and do this or that, but I probably can't help you here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All of that stuff. You're really talking about a couple of things, which is developing our own complexity of sense making and growing specific deliberate practices for working together with other people. It's actually fairly simple and straightforward. The details of it are I wouldn't say they're more complex, but there are some details. But just even simple things like, in the Agile coaching world, the notion of designed alliance, for instance, has become increasingly common parlance. That the idea that when you and the skills that we learn from flawless consulting, that kind of stuff, just even bringing those practices to bear, it takes us a long way toward the kinds of things that we're talking about here.
Right. It's actually, I took this sort of practice away from Marshall Goldsmith, who says he can only be successful if his clients are willing to change. He's because, first of all, it will be a reference case study only in this case if change will happen, and second, he even doesn't get paid if change doesn't happen. So that brings me, actually, because we're already close at the hour, to another question I just borrowed from Marshall Goldsmith. I want to try out here. It's a little bit of an experiment because it's a little bit confronting, but he brings in this question, this near-death experience, to say, if you were 95 and maybe 99, whatever. Actually, everybody wants to get 200 years today. No, actually. And you're about to take your last breath. That's what he usually says. And you were given a gift. You could travel back in time to yourself, the person you are today. What advice would you give to yourself? And so this is something I wanted to ask you, Michael. I mean, I fully recognize you're totally into this developmental perspectives, but again, zooming out and zooming in again, and then maybe also, maybe there is an advice you would have for society, for our industry. What would it be? If you just try this briefly.
So let's just say I only have one word. Okay, so here's that word: Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata. It's from a Walt Disney movie. I think it was The Lion King or something.
All
And
right.
there's some funny character who sings this song, Hakuna Matata, which is about, ultimately, it's about not taking yourself so seriously.
Nice.
Like all of this is just, there is nowhere this is going. There's
Right.
no place to get to that. I've been reflecting on the difference between being ambitious and having ambition. And being ambitious is like being really serious about it all. And, vertical development is really the thing, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything. It literally,
Right.
it's just simply something that I wake up to or others wake up
Yeah.
to. We wake
Yeah.
up to wherever we wake up to, right?
Yeah.
And there's some work to do, but it's not necessarily going to win the day necessarily.
Yeah. That's literally concurrent with what Marshall Goldsmith says, where he says most people would say, be happy now.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
get back to your friends and families.
Yeah.
Don't forget them. It's not, don't forget about saying, it's now. Don't say, yes, when I'm done with this project, when
Mhm.
I'm made my next step in my career, or when I go, finish my profession,
Mhm.
it's too late. And he also says, if you have a dream, go for it. I think what you just said resonates a lot with me. We're living currently in challenging times, but I think we can finally only succeed through positive energy and just say, hey, let's enjoy our being and create what we can.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, and then we could even replace this whole transformation terms by just saying, hey, let's do something meaningful, and who wants to participate and who wants to join, right?
Yeah.
That's what others call entrepreneurial ecosystems, but that's a more complex term, right? But
Yeah.
so what's your next step? So final, maybe that's a real final thing here, Michael. And in your,
Mhm.
I know you're always working on things and creating. You're in this
Mhm.
space
Mhm.
of creating offerings. Anything you want to share? Anything that's coming? I mean, we're mid 22. Any
Yeah.
outlook you want to give us?
Yeah. I think what I would like to share just briefly and invite people to kind of be on the lookout for a next big project that I am collaborating with a couple of other people on, Antoinette Coetsier and Esbjørn Hiltefort. And we are in the midst of creating this entity called the Center for Inner Agility, and it's a it's a combination of a community, an educational set of educational programs, and a research center for the nature of inner agility and how to go about growing inner agility both collectively and individually. So that's the thing that I've been working on. I continue to work with Michael Spade in the integral sense making and action part of the collective edge. And now I'm branching off and doing this new thing as well.
That
So,
sounds
but,
brilliant. That
yeah,
sounds
it's
energetic and promising and interesting. So
well, it's kind of like Evolve Agility 2.0. And so
right,
it's me coming back to Evolve Agility, having put it aside for a couple of years to
yeah,
launch some other things, and now I'm coming back to it.
that's cool. So people, if people want to reach out to you, I think there's a website, but you already mentioned the website is about to soon,
Yeah,
receive a lot of new information. So I think it's michaelhamman.com.
yeah.
But some of us are connected on LinkedIn. So those who are joining from LinkedIn, they have your contact here. And I want to thank you for this conversation. So thanks for your time. It was
Uh,
brilliant talking to you as usual. And
uh,
yeah, wish you a great time ahead and a lot of interesting results from what you just talked about. These inner agility um, research programs, education programs. Curious myself. I wish everybody who joined a marvelous rest of the week. And yeah, continue your development. It's the right time. And I think we need a lot of more impact in the world.
Great. And thank you, Mike, for all the work that you do. And it's been great, just being with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And see you soon.
Okay.